Raisi was a mass murdering president. He was responsible for the deaths of thousands of Iranian civilians. Overwhelmingly on the streets, online, Iranians have been celebrating. They have been raising a glass. They have been celebrating with fireworks upon the death, about the news of the death of Raisi. And this is because we have to understand who Raisi was. Raisi is emblematic of the regime itself. He represents the Islamic Republic and what it stands for. He is also viewed as Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the 85-year-old supreme leader's protege. Throughout his career, Raisi has had a blood-stained career moving up the ranks. And really, Raisi's rise was the product of Khamenei. I mean, Khamenei brought him up. Raisi himself, I mean, people in Iran would joke about Raisi's education, saying that he had studied only 6 classes of elementary school, 6 years of elementary school. So Raisi's rise was the product of Khamenei. His rise has been extremely bloody. He has the blood of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Iranians on his hands. And understandably, his demise, his death, has been celebrated by the Iranian people. And I think that is a really important point that should not get lost in the conversation, because the Iranian people will view Raisi's death and the regime's reaction to it and the regime's mishandling and handling of the past 24 hours. And it's very clear to them that actually when Khamenei dies, when that key moment happens, the same elites who handled the past 24 hours will be handling Khamenei's death. And therefore, elite chaos is inevitable. So for the Iranian people, that will be a boost in confidence that actually when Khamenei dies, that will provide the best opportunity to get rid of the Islamic Republic once and for all. Well, the immediate implications are that we will see now that a cohort will form from the vice president, the parliamentary head, parliamentary speaker, and the head of the judiciary. And in the next 50 days, there will be, quote, elections, but let's call them for what they are. Really, they are selections for the next president. And again, we have to cut through all of this. The real decision maker and power broker here is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. These individuals were merely servants to Khamenei. They weren't independent centers of power. They didn't have power in and of itself. But in terms of the bigger consequences, now for Khamenei, the 85-year-old supreme leader, this is majorly disruptive for his succession plans. And as I said earlier, Khamenei will look at the past 24 hours and the regime's handling of the Raisi's death, and he will view it as a test run for his own death, for succession. Because the same elites who handled the past 24 hours will be handling his own death. And in the past 5 years, he has spent an enormous amount of capital focused exclusively on ensuring a smooth succession process, going through this process of, quote, purification, empowering the most ideological absolutists across the board, Raisi being one of them, by the way, to ensure that when that moment comes, when he passes away, when he dies, succession will be smooth and orderly. Well, if Khamenei takes a step back and looks at the past 24 hours and the elite chaos, you know, the regime was in full panic mode. Khamenei will be extremely concerned about this, because if this happens when he dies, it could lead to the entire unraveling of the Islamic Republic. The supreme leader is fully aware that the Iranian people will use his death as an opportunity to bring an end to this regime. So while, you know, a lot of the analysis is that actually Khamenei holds all power and, you know, Raisi is easily replaceable, as is the foreign minister Amir Abdullahian. Yes, they're easily replaceable, but for Khamenei, he'll be looking at the bigger picture here, and that's this handling of the past 24 hours. He's 85 years old. He will be exclusively focused on succession and extremely anxious right now. Again, I would say it's a key moment in that it's a big loss for the regime. It's a big loss for Khamenei's manufactured plan for succession. Khamenei has sought to engineer outcomes, engineer public life, engineer the elites in such a way to ensure a smooth transition and succession process. Raisi was a key pillar of that. Raisi was also a key pillar of his, quote, second phase of the Islamic Revolution manifesto, his part of this project, which sought to complete the personalization of his power and also ensure a new wave of hardline Islamization on the streets. Now that plan will still continue, but you've got a key cog out of the system now. And again, for Khamenei, as I said, this will be viewed as a test run. And when viewed as a test run, the way the regime's handled it, the chaos and the mishandling, the utter incompetence, I mean, that provides an opening for the Iranian people. And the mood on the streets of Iran the morale will be high now. The regime will be fully aware of this. So expect in the next 24 to 48 hours, a heavily securitized presence on the streets, even more securitized than before. All the structural factors, by the way, that led to the 2022 protests following the murder of Mahsa Amini. Obviously, Mahsa's murder was the catalyst, was the trigger, was the spark. But there were deep-rooted structural causes that brought Iranian people on the street en masse against the regime. All of those structural factors, from the economy to corruption to political suppression to water security, the environment, in the past 12 months, they have all got worse. So protests in Iran were already on the horizon. The fact that Raisi's died and now the way the regime's handled it, this will boost the Iranian people's morale to take to the streets in greater confidence, knowing that the elites aren't consolidated despite Khamenei's efforts, and that this could cause a major fracture within the regime when Khamenei dies.
Where do you think this leaves Iran's or the IRGC's sponsoring of terror proxies in the region, and then the regime's nuclear ambitions?
Yeah, it's an important question. In terms of the actual policy, look, policies will not change as a result of Raisi's death or Amir Abdullahian's death. Power in the Islamic Republic is absolute in the hands of the supreme leader and his office, the Beit Rahbari, the office of the supreme leader. Let's not forget, the Islamic Republic is an absolute totalitarian dictatorship. Only one man rules with absolute authority. So in terms of policies, this won't affect much. Now, on the flip side, however, we keep hearing by the regime's lobbyists abroad that the Islamic Republic is, quote, powerful. But actually, I think this cuts through that. You know, all the Islamic Republic does abroad is export terror. And actually, domestically, it's extremely fragile. Even though it's a totalitarian dictatorship and Khamenei controls all the elites, domestically, the past 24 hours has demonstrated the utter incompetence and just how weak they really are. I think that really exposes the Achilles heel of the regime. And the Iranian people have been celebrating Raisi's death. That shows the gap between the regime and the people. So I think on the West side, and from an external perspective, Western governments should be looking at this regime, by the way, that kills its own people, that exports terror across the Middle East, that is committing acts of terrorism on European and British soil. They should look at the past 24 hours and actually view the regime and say, you know, they're not actually strong. They are incredibly weak. And we must now come together to support the aspirations of the Iranian people, because the fall of this totalitarian Islamist dictatorship will not only be the single most liberating thing for the Iranian people, for the Middle East, but actually for global peace and security.